Welcome. Before watching the video, I recommend you subscribe to my channel to see more interesting stories. Lucas had always considered himself lucky in life. He had a beautiful wife named Isabel, a loving family, and a successful career as a lawyer. He felt content with his life, and although there were ups and downs, he always thought that things would work out in the end. That was until the day he overheard a strange conversation between his wife and her friend. It started when Isabel's friend, Susan, came over for coffee one morning. Lucas was in his study working on some documents when he heard Susan's voice coming from the living room. He didn't think much of it, assuming that they were just catching up. But then he heard something that made him freeze. "I can't believe you're still with him, knowing what you've done," Susan said. Lucas couldn't hear Isabel's response, but his heart started pounding. What had she done? What was Susan talking about? Lucas tried to concentrate on his work, but he couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. He waited for Isabel to come into the study and tell him what was going on, but she never did. That night, he tried to bring it up during dinner, but Isabel avoided the subject and changed the topic. Lucas knew something was amiss, but he didn't want to push it. He trusted Isabel and believed that if there was something she needed to tell them, she would do it in her own time. Days turned into weeks, and Lucas started to feel like he was going crazy. He couldn't stop thinking about what Susan had said, and he couldn't help but wonder if Isabel was hiding something from him. One day, Lucas decided to confront Isabel about what he had overheard. They were in the kitchen making breakfast, and Lucas took a deep breath before speaking. "Isabel, I overheard something a few weeks ago, and I can't stop thinking about it. Susan said something about you doing something, and I need to know what it is." Isabel's face went pale, and she looked like she was about to faint. She didn't say anything for a few moments, and Lucas started to feel sick to his stomach. Finally, Isabel spoke. "Lucas, I need to tell you something, but you have to promise not to hate me. Promise me, Lucas." Lucas was confused and scared, but he promised. He didn't know what Isabel could have done that would make him hate her, but he was willing to listen. Isabel took a deep breath and looked down at the ground. "Lucas, a few years ago, I had an affair. It was a mistake, and I regret it every day. I thought I had ended it, but Susan is right. I've been seeing him again for the past few months." Lucas felt like he had been punched in the gut. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His wife, the woman he loved and trusted, had been cheating on him. He didn't know what to say, so he just stood there staring at her. Isabel started to cry. "I'm sorry, Lucas. I never meant to hurt you. I don't know what's wrong with me. I love you, but I can't seem to stop seeing him." Lucas didn't know what to do. He felt like his world had come crashing down around him. He loved Isabel, but he couldn't forgive her for this. Lucas spent the next few days in a daze. He didn't know what to do or who to talk to. He felt like his whole life was a lie. He couldn't believe that Isabel had been cheating on him for months, and he had no idea. He tried to talk to Isabel about it, but every time they started to talk, they ended up arguing. He couldn't get over the fact that she had lied to him and broken his trust. One day, Lucas was sitting in his study, trying to work, but he couldn't concentrate. He heard Isabel's voice from the other side of the door, and he realized that she was on the phone. He didn't mean to eavesdrop, but he couldn't help but listen. "Yes, I know. I'm trying to figure it out, but I can't keep lying to him. I have to tell him." Lucas felt his heart start to race. He didn't know who Isabel was talking to, but he had a feeling that it wasn't good. Lucas couldn't take it anymore. He had to know who Isabel was talking to and what they were talking about. He slowly opened the door and crept closer to where Isabel was sitting. As he got closer, he could hear the voice on the other end of the phone. "It's time, Isabel. You have to tell him the truth. He deserves to know." The voice was Susan's. Lucas felt like he had been hit by a truck. Susan was the one who had told him about Isabel's affair, and now she was urging Isabel to tell him the truth. Isabel looked up and saw Lucas standing there. She quickly ended the call and stood up, looking guilty. "Lucas, I can explain," she started, but Lucas didn't want to hear it. He felt like he had been played for a fool. He couldn't believe that Isabel had involved Susan in their private affairs. Lucas left the room without saying a word. He went to the garage and got into his car. He didn't know where he was going, but he had to get away from Isabel and Susan and their lies. He ended up driving to a nearby park and sat on a bench, staring off into space. He didn't know what he was going to do now. He felt like his life had been turned upside down, and he didn't know how to fix it. As he sat there, he saw a couple walking towards him. They were holding hands and laughing, and Lucas felt a pang of jealousy. He missed the way things used to be with Isabel. He missed the way they would hold hands and laugh together. He missed the way they would look into each other's eyes and know exactly what the other was thinking. But he knew that things could never be the same again. Isabel had broken his trust, and he didn't know if he could ever forgive her. Lucas spent the next few days avoiding Isabel as much as possible. He would leave for work early and come home late, just so he wouldn't have to see her. Isabel tried to talk to him, but he didn't want to hear it. He was angry and hurt, and he didn't know if he could ever get over it. One day, Isabel came home early from work and found Lucas sitting in the living room, staring at the wall. "Lucas, we need to talk," she said softly, sitting down next to him. Before continuing this story, I ask you to subscribe to my channel not to miss new videos. Also subscribe to Facebook. There you will be the first to know about new stories. Lucas didn't say anything, but he didn't push her away either. "I know I've hurt you, and I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you," Isabel continued. "But I need you to understand that it was a mistake. I love you, Lucas, and I always will." Lucas felt his heart soften a little bit. He knew that Isabel was sincere, but he didn't know if he could ever trust her again. "Isabel, I don't know if I can ever forgive you," he said finally, "but I'm willing to try. We have a lot of work to do if we want to fix this." Isabel nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know, Lucas, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make things right." Over the next few weeks, Lucas and Isabel went to counseling and tried to work through their issues. It was hard, and there were times when Lucas felt like giving up, but he knew that he loved Isabel and wanted to make things work. One day, as they were leaving their counseling session, Isabel turned to Lucas and said, "There's something else I need to tell you." Lucas felt a wave of dread wash over him. He didn't think he could handle any more secrets. "What is it?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Isabel took a deep breath. "It's about our son, Ethan." Lucas felt his heart stop. Ethan was their only child, and he was the center of their world. "What about him?" Lucas asked, his voice trembling. "I had him tested for a genetic disorder a few weeks ago," Isabel said, "and the results came back positive. He has Huntington's disease." Lucas felt like he had been punched in the gut. Huntington's disease was a degenerative neurological disorder that had no cure. It would slowly rob Ethan of his motor skills, cognitive abilities, and eventually his life. He felt like he was drowning in despair. How much more could he take? Lucas and Isabel spent the next few days in a daze, trying to process the news about Ethan. They both knew that their lives would never be the same again. As they sat together in Ethan's room, watching him sleep, Lucas realized that he couldn't do this alone. He needed Isabel by his side, no matter what. "Isabel, I know things have been hard between us, but I need you now more than ever," Lucas said, taking her hand. "We have to be strong for Ethan." Isabel nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know, Lucas. We'll get through this together." Over the next few months, Lucas and Isabel devoted themselves to caring for Ethan. They took him to doctor's appointments, physical therapy sessions, and occupational therapy sessions. They read everything they could about Huntington's disease and tried to prepare themselves for what was to come. It was hard, and there were times when Lucas felt like giving up. But he knew that he couldn't. He had to be strong for Ethan and for Isabel. One day, as he was sitting with Ethan in the backyard, watching him play, Lucas realized that he had never loved his son more. Ethan was the light of his life, and he would do anything to protect him. But he also knew that he couldn't do it alone. He needed Isabel by his side, no matter what. As time passed, Lucas and Isabel began to grow closer again. They talked about their fears and hopes for Ethan's future, and slowly began to let go of the past. One day, as they were sitting on the couch together, watching Ethan play with his toys, Isabel turned to Lucas and said, "I'm sorry for everything, Lucas. I never should have kept secrets from you." Lucas looked at her, surprised. "It's okay, Isabel. We've both made mistakes. What's important now is that we're here for each other." Isabel smiled, tears in her eyes. "I love you, Lucas." Lucas felt a warmth spread through his chest. He had missed hearing those words. "I love you too, Isabel," he said, pulling her close. For the first time in a long time, Lucas felt hopeful about their future together. It wouldn't be easy, but they would face it together. As he looked at Ethan, he knew that they would do whatever it took to give him the best life possible. And that included being a united front, no matter what secrets they may uncover along the way. Months turned into years, and Ethan's disease began to progress. He became less and less able to do the things he loved, and Lucas and Isabel's lives became consumed with caring for him. Despite the challenges, they never lost sight of the love they had for each other. They stood together through every hardship, every doctor's appointment, and every tear shed. One day, as they were sitting in the living room with Ethan, Lucas heard Isabel on the phone. He could tell from the sound of her voice that something was wrong. After she hung up, Isabel turned to Lucas, tears in her eyes. "That was my friend from college. She's been diagnosed with Huntington's disease too." Lucas felt his heart drop. "I'm so sorry, Isabel. That's terrible news." Isabel nodded, wiping away her tears. "It's just so unfair. Why do we have to go through this?" Lucas didn't have an answer to that question, but he knew that they would get through it together. They had each other, and they had Ethan. As they sat together in silence, Lucas felt a sense of peace wash over him. It was as if, in that moment, everything had come full circle. The secret that had threatened to tear them apart had ultimately brought them closer together. And as long as they had each other, Lucas knew that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. Years passed, and Ethan's disease continued to progress. It was difficult to watch him deteriorate, but Lucas and Isabel were determined to make the most of the time they had left with him. They took him on trips to the beach and to the mountains, even though it was hard for him to get around. They spent countless hours reading him his favorite books, and they never missed a single doctor's appointment. One day, as they were sitting in the hospital waiting room, Isabel turned to Lucas and said, "I don't want to think about what life will be like without him." Lucas took her hand. "I know, Isabel, but we have to be strong for him, and for each other." Isabel nodded, tears in her eyes. "I just wish we had more time." Lucas felt a lump form in his throat. He wished the same thing, but he knew that they had to cherish the time they had left. As they sat there, waiting for Ethan to come out of his appointment, Lucas thought back to that day in the coffee shop when he had overheard Isabel's conversation. He had never imagined that their lives would take this turn, but he knew that he wouldn't want to go through it with anyone else but Isabel by his side. And as they waited for Ethan, Lucas knew that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together as a family. The next few years were both the best and worst of Lucas' life. They were filled with laughter and joy as they made the most of their time with Ethan, but also with heartbreak and sadness as they watched him slowly slip away. Eventually, the day they had been dreading arrived. Ethan passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by his loved ones. Lucas and Isabel were devastated. They had lost their son, their rock, and their reason for being. They mourned together, holding each other tight as they grieved. As they went through Ethan's things, they came across a letter he had written to them before he died. In it, he told them how much he loved them, and how grateful he was for all they had done for him. Reading the letter, Lucas felt a sense of comfort. Even though Ethan was gone, his love would always be with them. And as they said their final goodbyes to Ethan, Lucas knew that he had been right all along. The secret that had once threatened to tear them apart had ultimately brought them closer together. Isabel and Lucas emerged from Ethan's funeral with a newfound appreciation for life. They had been through so much together, and they knew that they could face anything as long as they had each other. As they walked back to their car, hand in hand, Lucas felt a sense of peace. Despite everything they had been through, they had come out the other side stronger than ever. And as they drove away from the cemetery, Lucas knew that their love was unbreakable, no matter what life threw their way. Months passed, and Lucas and Isabel slowly began to rebuild their lives. They threw themselves into work, spending long hours at the office and taking on new projects. But even as they worked hard to move on, they could never forget Ethan. His memory was always with them, a constant reminder of the love and joy he had brought into their lives. One day, as they were having lunch together at their favorite restaurant, Isabel turned to Lucas and said, "I think it's time." Lucas looked at her, confused. "Time for what?" Isabel smiled. "Time for us to start a new chapter. Time for us to think about adopting." Lucas felt his heart skip a beat. He had never thought about having another child. But as he looked into Isabel's eyes, he knew that he was ready. And so, they began the long process of adopting a child. It was difficult and time-consuming, but they were determined to give another child the love and happiness they had given to Ethan. Finally, after months of waiting, they received a call. A young girl named Maria needed a home, and they were the perfect match. Lucas and Isabel were overjoyed. They went to meet Maria and fell in love with her instantly. She was smart and funny and kind, and they knew that she was meant to be their daughter. As they filled out the paperwork and made arrangements to bring Maria home, Lucas knew that he was starting a new chapter in his life. He'd have been through so much, but he was ready for whatever came next. And as they walked out of the adoption agency, hand in hand with Maria, Lucas knew that he had finally found the happiness and fulfillment he had been searching for all along. Years passed, and Lucas and Isabel watched Maria grow into a beautiful young woman. She was talented and driven, with a heart full of love and a desire to make a difference in the world. And as they watched her, they knew that they had made the right decision. They had given her the love and support she needed to thrive, and in return, she had filled their lives with joy and purpose. But even as they celebrated Maria's successes, they could never forget Ethan. He was always a part of their family, a presence they felt every day. One day, as they were sitting in the garden, Isabel turned to Lucas and said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Ethan had lived?" Lucas thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I don't think about that. I just know that we were meant to be his parents for a little while, to love him and care for him and help him grow." Isabel nodded. "I know, but sometimes I can't help but wonder. What kind of man would he have become? What kind of life would we have had with him?" Lucas took her hand and squeezed it. "I don't know, but I do know one thing. I'm grateful for the time we had with him. It wasn't long enough, but it was enough to know that we loved him and that he loved us." They sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun set over the garden. And as they did, Lucas knew that no matter what happened in the future, they would always have each other and the memories they had created together. And that was enough. But one day, everything changed. Lucas was sitting in his study, lost in thought, when he heard a faint sound coming from the hallway. He listened for a moment, then got up and walked to the door. As he opened it, he heard his wife's voice coming from the other end of the hallway, low and urgent. He hesitated for a moment, then crept forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He peeked around the corner and saw Isabel standing by the front door, her back to him, her phone held to her ear. "Please, David," she was saying. "I can't take it anymore. We have to tell him the truth." Lucas felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He knew that voice. David was their neighbor, a friend of Isabel's from college. But why was she talking to him about telling the truth? He stepped back into the study, his mind racing. What truth could she be talking about? Was there something she had been keeping from him all these years? He paced the room for a moment, then took a deep breath and walked back into the hallway. Isabel was still on the phone, her voice tense and urgent. "Okay," she said finally. "We'll talk about it tonight. Thank you, David." She hung up and turned around, startled to see Lucas standing there. "Lucas," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't hear you." He looked at her, his heart heavy with dread. "What truth, Isabel? What were you talking about with David?" Isabel hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "Lucas, there's something I need to tell you." Lucas felt his heart drop as his wife's words hung in the air. He had suspected for a while that something was off, but he never could have imagined this. Isabel took a step towards him, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'm sorry, Lucas. I've been keeping something from you for a long time." Lucas's mind raced, trying to prepare himself for whatever truth his wife was about to reveal. He braced himself for the worst, but nothing could have prepared him for what Isabel said next. "I'm in love with David," she said softly. Lucas felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. His wife was in love with another man. He had always thought they had a happy marriage. How could he not have seen this coming? Isabel continued, her voice shaking with emotion. "I know it's wrong, Lucas. I know I betrayed your trust, but I can't help how I feel." Lucas felt numb as he tried to process what he was hearing. He had never felt so betrayed in his life. He had always trusted his wife completely, but now he realized he didn't know her at all. He took a step back, needing to get away from her. He couldn't bear to look at her. "I need some time to think," he said quietly, then turned and walked away. As Lucas paced the house, he struggled to come to terms with what he had just learned. He couldn't shake the feeling that his whole life had been a lie. How could he have been so blind? Days turned into weeks, and Lucas found himself lost in a fog of anger, confusion, and heartbreak. He didn't know how to move forward, how to confront his wife and David, how to make sense of this betrayal. One night, as he lay awake in bed, his mind racing, he realized that he couldn't go on like this. He needed closure. He needed to confront his wife and get to the bottom of this once and for all. The next morning, he sat Isabel down and demanded the truth. She told him everything, about how her feelings for David had grown over time, about how they had been seeing each other secretly for months. Lucas felt a wave of nausea wash over him as he listened. He had never felt so hurt in his life. But as Isabel spoke, he also felt a strange sense of relief. At least he finally knew the truth. In the end, Lucas and Isabel decided to separate. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was the only one that made sense. Lucas knew that he could never trust his wife again, and he couldn't bear to stay with her knowing that she loved someone else. As he packed his bags and prepared to leave the home they had shared for so many years, Lucas felt a sense of sadness and regret. He had loved Isabel once, with all his heart, but now, as he walked away, he knew that love was gone forever. Lucas spent the next few days in a daze, unable to think about anything but his wife's betrayal. He couldn't believe that the woman he had loved and trusted for so many years had been keeping such a huge secret from him. Isabel tried to talk to him, to explain herself, but Lucas wasn't ready to listen. He needed time to process everything that had happened. Finally, he decided he couldn't stay in the house any longer. He packed a bag and left without a word to Isabel. He didn't know where he was going, but he knew he needed to get away. He drove for hours, lost in his thoughts. He tried to make sense of everything that had happened, but he couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. He had given his heart to Isabel completely, and she had thrown it away without a second thought. As the sun began to set, Lucas found himself in a small town in the middle of nowhere. He parked the car and got out, needing to stretch his legs. He walked aimlessly through the streets, not really paying attention to where he was going. He ended up in a small park, where he sat down on a bench and stared out at the sunset. For the first time since he had left home, Lucas felt a sense of peace. The beauty of the sunset reminded him that there was still good in the world, even if his heart was broken. As he sat there, lost in thought, a woman approached him. She was tall and slim, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes. Lucas was taken aback by her beauty. "Hello," she said, smiling at him. "Mind if I join you?" Lucas hesitated for a moment, but then nodded his head. He didn't really feel like talking to anyone, but he didn't want to be rude either. "Sure," he said, gesturing to the empty spot on the bench beside him. The woman sat down, her eyes still fixed on him. "Are you okay?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Lucas sighed. "Not really," he admitted. "My life has just been turned upside down." The woman nodded sympathetically. "I'm sorry to hear that. Is there anything I can do to help?" Lucas shook his head. "I don't think so. I just need some time to figure things out." The woman studied him for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "Listen," she said. "I don't usually do this, but I feel like you could use a friend right now. Would you like to grab a drink with me?" Lucas was taken aback by the offer. He had never been the type to talk to strangers, let alone go out with them. But something about this woman made him feel safe. "Okay," he said finally. "That sounds nice." The woman smiled at him, and Lucas felt a flutter in his chest. Maybe things weren't so bad after all. Maybe he could find a way to move on from Isabel's betrayal, with a little help from this stranger. Lucas hesitated for a moment, not sure if he wanted to talk to anyone. But there was something about the woman's smile that made him feel a little bit better. He nodded, and she sat down next to him. "I couldn't help but notice you seemed lost in thought," she said. "Is everything okay?" Lucas was surprised by her perceptiveness. He had been trying to hide his pain, but she had seen through his facade. "No, everything's not okay," he admitted. "My wife, she betrayed me. I don't know what to do." The woman listened attentively as Lucas poured out his heart to her. He told her everything, from Isabel's affair with David to his own feelings of betrayal and heartbreak. When he was finished, the woman didn't judge him or offer platitudes. Instead, she simply sat with him in silence, holding his hand and offering him a sense of comfort he hadn't felt since the world had come crashing down around him. As they sat there, watching the sunset together, Lucas realized that he had been so focused on his pain that he had forgotten about the beauty in the world. He had been so caught up in his own suffering that he had lost sight of the fact that life was still worth living. He looked at the woman next to him, her face glowing in the fading light. He didn't know who she was or where she had come from, but he was grateful for her presence. "Thank you," he said softly. "I don't even know your name, but thank you for being here with me." The woman smiled at him, her blue eyes sparkling in the darkness. "My name is Sarah," she said, "and I'm here because I believe that everything happens for a reason." Lucas wasn't sure he believed in fate or destiny, but he was willing to entertain the idea. Maybe, just maybe, Sarah had been sent to him for a reason. Maybe she was the light he needed to guide him through the darkness. As they sat there together, watching the world go by, Lucas felt a sense of peace wash over him. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that he wasn't alone. With Sarah by his side, he felt like he could face anything. As Lucas and the woman walked away from the park, he couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Maybe this was the start of something new. Maybe he could learn to love again, even after everything that had happened. Over the next few weeks, Lucas spent more and more time with the woman. Her name was Lily, and she was everything Isabel wasn't. She was kind, compassionate, and understanding. She listened to him when he needed to talk and didn't judge him for his mistakes. A few months later, Lucas proposed to Lily. They were sitting on a bench in the same park where they had first met, watching the sunset, when he got down on one knee and asked her to marry him. Lily said yes, and Lucas knew that he had finally found the happiness he had been searching for. He was grateful for Isabel's betrayal, in a way. Without it, he never would have met Lily, and he never would have learned to love again. And that is the end of the story. Thank you for joining me on this journey of love and heartache. Remember, no matter what life throws at you, there is always hope for a better tomorrow. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. It's the best thanks for my efforts.